Hello, and welcome to the first episode of As Told by Jade. I procrastinated on the book that I wanted to do this for, so I'm just going to go instead with my favourite classic, and we're going to talk about Pride and Prejudice, because I know that one off by heart. So. Could work, this might not. The settings for this, as in the setting for what I'm doing, may change. I'm just going to see if I can do it with the whiteboard, so bear with me. This is a new concept, so it might, Pride and Prejudice. Who are our main actors, characters as we start in? We have Pride and Prejudice is the story of the Bennets. We have Mr. Bennet, who is a gentleman of slightly lower class standing than some gentlemen. He is quiet and bookish and doesn't really like to do a lot. He just likes to sit in his study and read. We have Mrs. Bennet, who is incredibly highly strung. Her sole focus really is to get her daughters married off to well-to-do gentlemen, which, seeing as they can't earn their own money or own their own property, is actually not that bad of a thing, really. However, she is almost single-minded in her pursuit of this goal, to the point where it doesn't really matter what her daughters want. We have the oldest daughter, Jane, who is the literal definition of a cinnamon roll, I believe. She is beautiful, shy, kind, and just tends to be happy almost all the time. We have Elizabeth Bennet, who is our heroine. She is sassy, she is bolshy, she will do anything for her family and her loved ones, and she takes no shit from anyone, and I love her. I'm also going to call her Lizzie for the rest of this, because it's easier to say. We then have Mary, who is bookish and also quite quiet, but in a more sombre way. She's not that interested in men or marriage or pretty much anything other than her books. She takes after Mr. Bennet in that account, I believe, and to be honest, I think out of all the sisters, she would be the most happy to be a spinster, really. Lydia Bennet is a 15-year-old girl. She is the almost epitome of a 15-year-old girl. She likes parties, she likes pretty things, she likes boys, and having fun. There's nothing really serious about Lydia. She is just all about the fun and enjoying herself, which, can't really fault her for that. And then you have Catherine Bennet, or Kitty as I'm going to call her, because that's how she's talked about in the entire book. Kitty is almost like a Lydia clone. She is, I believe, 14. She just follows Lydia's sort of lead on most things. She wants to do what Lydia wants to do. She likes parties, likes boys. As this is Regency era, women can't own property, so the fact that Mr. and Mrs. Bennet have had exclusively girls means that when Mr. Bennet dies, his household will go to the next male heir. Screw all of the closest relatives that he has. Not really his fault, just kind of how the law works. Women can't own anything. So, as stated earlier, Mrs. Bennet wants to get her children married off before anything bad happens, so that they're not, tossed out onto the street. And luckily for her, a man by the name of Charles Bingley comes and rents the massive estate and house of Netherfield. So she's instantly got her eyes on him. She's like, right, he is doing for one of my daughters, he's single, we're gonna go. He also brings with him Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. For ease of everything, I'm going to just call them Bingley and Darcy from now on. William Darcy is richer than Bingley, however he is not particularly socially adept, which comes across as a pomposity and a bit of a rudeness, to be honest, but I think he is just literally screaming inside the entire time he is having to interact with people that he doesn't know. And I think that is proven by the fact that Charles Bingley is the human equivalent of a golden retriever. And someone who is the human equivalent of a golden retriever wouldn't necessarily be friends with someone who is not nice. So, I mean, they have like a dog-cat friendship in that Darcy is the cat, Bingley is the dog. Bingley also brings his sister Caroline, who is a bitch. A snobby woman who is very clearly infatuated with Darcy, wants to be Mrs. Darcy if she can. So fairly soon after they arrive, there is a ball in the town where all of the Bennets go, as do our newly acquired threesome. That sounded weird. And during that time, Mrs. Bennet tries to throw multiple daughters at these elderly young men. However, Jane and Charles actually seem to get along very well. They have completely matching personalities. They are both literal rays of sunshine and are perfect for each other. Mr. Darcy kind of sits sullenly in the corner, even though there are far more ladies than there are men, so there are certain ladies that haven't got dancing partners. He finally begrudgingly dances with Elizabeth, even though she has heard him saying that the only tolerable lady in that entire dance is Jane, and, you know, kind of takes that personally, and they end up with a little bit of a enemies spat kind of thing going on, where she's got she's got his measure. She is like, no, you are rude, you are uncouth, I am done with you. It is a constant state of shame that I do not have a fancy milk jug, so I'm just pouring straight from the carton like the heathen I am. As this is a fancy teacup, we are going milk first, because for those of you who don't know, the reason you go milk first traditionally is that we're just having a random tea lesson intermixed with this, but the reason you go milk first is that when you are drinking out of a bone china cup, if you put hot tea in before you put the milk in, you will crack the china. Okay, here is my question. Can you read this? Because looking through the viewfinder, I'm not entirely sure you can. I also don't have the best writing. Let us continue. After this ball, because he is instantly smitten and Caroline can see this, and she, whilst I did state in her introduction that she is a bitch, she is not a total bitch and does have her brother's interests at heart, I believe. She's just a bit blind when it comes to Darcy. So, Caroline invites Jane to dinner at Netherfield, and with a little bit of conniving from Mrs. Bennet's part, because she knows it's about to rain, she doesn't let Jane take the carriage, she makes her ride there on a horse. Jane gets caught in the rain, becomes ill, is forced to stay at Netherfield. Mrs. Bennet is thrilled with this. Elizabeth, on the other hand, considering the fact that the only person she can barely tolerate other than Mr. Bennet has now left the house, decides, to hell with all of you, I'm going to go and visit Jane and look after her. So she walks the 3 miles to Netherfield, through the mud, not giving a shit, because she is just like, I'm on a mission, I don't care about what people think of me. She appears at Netherfield, a bit bedraggled, a bit muddy, much to Caroline's delight. So she is instantly snide in that way that Austen characters are, in that it sounds vaguely polite to begin with, and then you realise, no, she's just ready to fill. Elizabeth and Jane stay at Netherfield until Jane gets better, during which time this amazing scene happens, in which it's after dinner, I believe, Elizabeth is reading, Bingley and Jane are talking, and Caroline comes up to Elizabeth and says, why don't we take a turn about the room, aka should we just wander about the room? And Elizabeth goes, what? I'm quite happy where I am. And Caroline's, no, I need to talk to you, we're going to have a walk, and as they do, she walks past Darcy and says, why don't you come and walk with us? And Mr. William Darcy says, well, that would completely defeat the point of why you're doing this. Either you're wandering around so that you can have a little bit of a gossip, in which case I'm sure you'd be less willing to tell each other secrets whilst I'm there, or the reason you're doing it is because wandering around means that I have a good view of you, and as such I can see the view from here. I'm like half convinced that this entire video is going to just be like the board with me just dipping in and out every now and then, so I mean, we're learning, we're dealing with it. So once Jane has recovered enough, her and Lizzie return to their family home just in time for Mr. Collins to come for a visit. Now, Mr. Collins is Mr. Bennet's closest male relative, which means that they're like third cousins or something. Anyway, and he will be the one that will inherit their house once Mr. Bennet is dead. So, Mrs. Bennet is like, right, well, Jane is already kind of spoken for despite the fact that Bingley hasn't actually proposed or anything yet. So, why don't I try and throw one of these four at him? Wow, I went really like common. So she has instantly zeroes in on Elizabeth and sits them next to each other at dinner, which Elizabeth is like plotting murder for because Mr. Collins is one of the dullest men alive, also one of the most pompous. He thinks that everything he has to say is absolute tiny pearls of wisdom, everyone needs to hear it. I believe we have all met a Mr. Collins in our life. And after this dinner he decides it would be the prime time to propose to Lizzie. Lizzie says no, in no uncertain terms. She's like, no thank you. And he goes, let's not play hard to get. Let me ask again. And she's like, excuse me, did I fucking stutter? No. No. And he's like, come on now, I know that ladies have to put up a little bit of a defence so that their virtue stays intact and everything like that, but I'm the best you're going to get. I'm having your house. Come on now. And she lays into him. She's like, I would rather die than marry you, you pompous asshole. In much more flowery words. And he finally gets the gist, storms off to tell her parents. Mrs. Bennet is in a massive tizzy with this and hauls Mr. Bennet out of his library down to talk to Lizzie and is like, talk sense into your daughter because if she does not marry him, I will never speak to her again. And he's like, you've heard your mother, if you do not marry him, she will never speak to you again. If you do marry him, I will never speak to you again. And Lizzie's like, thank you, Dad. And there we go. Mrs. Bennet goes off in a state, comes down with a case of vapours, is bedridden because her nerves are just shot because how dare her daughter and her husband. Yeah, so very soon after that, a contingency of soldiers arrives in the village, including a Mr. George Wickham, who is... I have trouble, like, I don't know which one I'm gonna say is worse, Mr. Wickham or Mr. Collins. They're bad in different ways. Anyway, Mr. George Wickham arrives and quickly befriends Lizzie and Lydia and Kitty because soldiers have arrived and they are, like, absolutely beside themselves. It's Christmas come early, they are all over it. So also in a vain attempt to try and wrangle her sisters into some semblance of decency, Lizzie is following them around and being like, right, okay. So she bumps into Mr. George Wickham, they strike up a friendship, they start having a bit of a flirt, and find out that Mr. Wickham knows Mr. Darcy. Lizzie by this point in time has, like, her opinion on Darcy as being a pompous asshole has not changed. And after she hears from George Wickham that Darcy finagled him out of some inheritance, I should probably go into more depth about that story. During the time that they're hanging out, Wickham tells Lizzie that he knows Darcy. They grew up together. He was like, almost like they were like almost adopted brothers. Darcy's father basically raised him and promised that when he came of an age and could, you know, start having a job, as much of a job as gentlemen have. Anyway, he would provide him a salary so that he could become a clergyman, because that's what Wickham wanted to do. And upon his father's death, Darcy denied him this salary, left him basically destitute, and was like, no, you have nothing. So Elizabeth, who already didn't really like him, thought he was a bit pompous ass, now thinks he's just, pure evil, and my cat has hiccups. Anyway, thinks he's pure evil, doesn't want anything to do with him ever again, which is unfortunate because a little while later Wickham has to leave and do soldierly things, and there is another ball because I don't know, what else are the upper class going to do other than party, and Darcy asks Lizzie to dance, and Lizzie is like, okay, fine, I'm going to ignore you whilst we do it, which is, like, dancing was a way for people to talk as they did it in this time period. So she's ignoring him, but also during this time Mrs. Bennet is getting lit, and Lydia and Kitty are just running rampant. They are, yeah. And Darcy is like, oh shit, who am I dealing with? Who is Bingley gonna marry into if he continues with Jane? Because, wow. This ain't good. The only problem with tiny teacups is that they don't really offer you all that much tea. It's like 2 mouthfuls in here. I think it's either during this party or very soon after that Lizzie, who finds out that her best friend, who I have not mentioned before, Charlotte Lucas, has been proposed to by none other than Mr. Collins. And Charlotte has never had any great concept of romance. Her family is a lot poorer than the Bennets. She was quite flattered by the proposal and is like, you know what, this will give me a house, a station, and I want to be destitute. So, yes please. Lizzie is frankly quite betrayed by this and is like, oh my god, how dare you, you're also leaving me forever because you've got to move with Mr. Collins, and like, what about love and happiness? And Charlotte is like, look, I'm poor, I don't have time to think about that. So she leaves. I mean, Lizzie is being a bit short-sighted, I think, in this point, because now that they're married, they're technically related. So she has, like, she's not losing her best friend, in fact she's now gaining like a cousin/sister type thing. This is getting a bit messy, but we'll just roll with it. It is also after this party that, despite the fact that Jane and Bingley have been getting on like a house on fire, Bingley suddenly up and leaves with Caroline and Darcy, and they say they have no intention of ever returning to Netherfield again. They suddenly need to be in London. He hasn't said anything to Jane, he's just sort of like disappeared. Jane is heartbroken, Lizzie is furious. Mrs. Bennet has taken to her bed, as she is wont to do, and is like, oh my god, we're gonna die in the gutter, woe is me. So Lizzie is like, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding, Bingley would never be so cruel, why don't you go to London and stay with our aunt and uncle who live there and like bump into him at some point. So Jane heads off to do so, leaving Lizzie with Mary, Lydia and Kitty. So we've lost Jane. Lizzie, I think, one, for her sanity, because she's just got these people to deal with now, and also because she misses a friend, she wants to build bridges and stuff like that. She goes to Kent to visit Charlotte and Mr. Collins. I spelt the word Charlotte wrong. There we go, it's better. I think it's still wrong, but we'll just run with it. In Kent, to go and see them, see where her friend has set up house, and she's delighted to find out that Charlotte is actually thriving with Mr. Collins. She's very clearly the head of the household, but she lets Mr. Collins think that he is. So she's got a good way of, like, he'll go off on like a ramble and she'll be like, yes dear, but we're going to do it this way. So she has a home, she's well looked after, and whilst staying there, Lizzie gets invited to Mr. Collins' patron's house. I've got to look it up because I don't know how to spell it. So they go to Lady Catherine with a C. De Berg. God, my writing's terrible. Who also just happens to be Darcy's aunt. Darcy's not there at this point in time, I don't think. Anyway, go up and she's like dour, she is imperious, she is, oh, I am a lady, you are common scum, despite the fact that Mr. Bennet is a gentleman. But whatever. They go for dinner multiple times. Charlotte's like, yeah, this is like just a common thing that we do, just run with it. Whilst one evening they go for dinner and they bump into Mr. Darcy and Mr. Darcy's cousin, Fitzwilliam Darcy, who I'm just going to call Fitz because I need to differentiate between them somehow. I don't know why they keep giving each other people the same name. Anyway, so we have Darcy and Fitz, is what we're going to go with. During this time, you find out that Lady Catherine de Bourgh is like convinced that Mr. Darcy is going to marry her daughter, who is a very ill, waifish girl who has like no real personality, and I've even forgotten her name. It might be Alice, I think. Anywho, but during this reunion, Lizzie is like not happy, not doing it. She's also just like, but she gets on very well with Fitz, who is lovely. And she's starting to think, she's like, hang on a sec, we've got Bingley, who is a literal ray of sunshine, Fitz, who is hilarious and well-intentioned. How is Darcy friends with these people? Like, what is going on? She doesn't really get an answer to that. But she's also just like, ah, yes, you and your aunt, one and the same. So because she is, you know, trying to avoid Darcy and has become friends with Fitz, they go on a walk. And during this, Lizzie finds out why the Bingleys left so quickly. Turns out that Darcy convinced Bingley that Jane only wanted him for his money, was not in love with him, was not even serious about courting him, because he heard when Mrs. Bennet was, you know, having the time of her life at that party, just drinking and making merry, she was very loudly stating that her daughter was about to marry someone very wealthy and like saying about how much he earned and all that stuff. So Darcy was like, no. And basically told Bingley this and broke his heart a little bit, and then they disappeared to London. So, like, this man's card has already been marked. It's even worse now. Lizzie is like out for blood, which makes it hilarious that at one point in time, soon after, Collins and Charlotte somewhere else, probably at Catherine's house. Lizzie is like, I'm not feeling that well, I can't stand this lady. I'm just going to stay home and write some letters. I'm going to talk to Jane, well, like, write letters to Jane and basically be like, you need to find Bingley and you need to win him back. Darcy appears, like, at the house that she's staying at and declares his undying love for her, out of the blue. And she's like, what? I begging your pardon? And I mean, it's, my poor man, it is one of the worst proposals. It's even worse than Mr. Collins. Because at least Mr. Collins was to say, like, marry me, marry me, marry me. Darcy just goes for the full-on neg, is what he does. He's like, yes, despite my, like, trying so hard, despite the fact that you are poor and your family is crazy, and all of my logic telling me that this is a bad idea, I am in love with you, please marry me. And this is like, I'm sorry, like, what? And he's like, oh, well, I'm very sorry that you feel that way. Sucks to be you, I guess, but I could never marry someone as evil as you. And lays all of the things out on the line, talks about the fact that he broke Jane's heart and subsequently Bingley's heart as well. She talks about George Wickham, and basically tells him to bugger right the fuck off. And so he does. He's like, alright, I know where I'm beat, bye. After this smackdown, Elizabeth goes home, Darcy goes somewhere, probably home as well, and Lizzie receives a letter from Darcy. I think he might handwrite it. Yeah, no, I think he comes back and gives her a letter. Anyway, he writes a letter explaining himself, all of the accusations that Lizzie laid against him, and basically explains that he was under the assumption that Jane genuinely didn't like Bingley and was just using him for his money, and he's not going to apologise for that. He still thinks he's in the right. However, she is completely in the wrong about Mr. Wickham, and tells his side of the story, which is basically that yes, they were friends when they were younger. His father had promised a salary if he became a clergyman. However, when Darcy's dad died, Wickham decided he actually didn't want to be a clergyman, but he still wanted the money. So Darcy was like, that wasn't really the agreement, but okay, he basically wrote him a check and was like, there's all of the money that you were going to get as a clergyman as like a salary, have it, we're done. Wickham spent it all, came back and asked for more. Darcy was like, no, did you not I said we're done. You're not getting anything else out of me. So, because he's a creep, George Wickham decided to start hitting on William Darcy's 15-year-old sister, Georgina. Or Georgiana, I believe is how you pronounce it, who is, by all intents and purposes, another ray of sunshine. This guy just seems to attract rays of sunshine in his life, which is like one point in his favour, I guess. Anyway, George Wickham starts hitting on Georgiana. She is a young 15-year-old who believes she is in love, so she agrees to run away with him and elope. George Wickham is very clearly either a massive cradle snatcher, which, I won't put it past him, or he is doing this to extort Darcy. So Darcy finds out that they've eloped, tracks him down, appears, writes George Wickham a cheque, because Georgiana is like, no, you couldn't pay him off, he loves me, that's the thing. So flexing his I don't give a fuck, I'm rich muscles, Darcy writes him a cheque and George Wickham goes, alright, thanks, see ya, bye, and pisses off, leaving Georgiana heartbroken and Darcy to clean up that mess. So Lizzie is like, oh, okay, fair enough. The next time George Wickham is in town, he's getting a foot to the nuts. Fair play. So because of this, she's kind of starting to reinterpret her own feelings to Darcy. She's still like, well, it was kind of still a shitty thing that you did to my sister, but now that you've given me the facts from your side, I can sort of yes, my family were acting a little bit gold diggery, so maybe I can understand that. I apologise for my family. You still shouldn't have done it. You still should have, accepted that Charles Bingley is a big boy and can make his own decisions, but what else? And also, yes, that sucks with Wickham. He is the devil. We will never speak of him. So, several months pass, not a lot has happened. Jane is still in London, I think, or I think she's still in London, she's still trying to find Bingleys. Lizzie is invited by the Gardeners? Yeah. Lizzie is invited by the Gardeners, who are her aunt and uncle, I believe, or very close family friends. Anyway, to go up to Yorkshire. Derbyshire. Wrong one. Yeah. To go with them to Derbyshire on holiday. Get her out of the house. So she agrees, and whilst they're out there, they decide to visit Pemberley, which just so happens to be Darcy's house, which is massive, huge estate, bigger than Netherfield. She's like, damn. But she's also like, I have very conflicting emotions about this man now. We didn't end on the best terms the last time we met, and I've learnt more things about him since then. I don't really know how to deal with him. Can we not? And they're like, oh, don't worry, we checked, he's not home. We're just going to wander around his house whilst he's not there. I don't know, right? Things were different back then. So they knock on the door, the housekeeper lets them in. She's like, yes, come and have a look, he's away, he'll be back at some point, but I'm more than happy to let you wander around this man's house. As she does so, she is full of praise for Miss Darcy, says that he always treats the servants really well, he's a great landlord, blah 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 blah. Lizzie's like, okay, because the Guardians are like, oh, the way a man treats his servants says a lot about him. I thought you said he was awful, Lizzie, and she's like, yeah, so did I. I also thought he was awful, but okay. Just so happens that Mr. Darcy comes home a bit early and bumps into Lizzie while she's there, and she freaks out. She's like, oh no, I don't know how to deal with you. And she's also like, oh god, okay, well, he's probably going to be like, as he usually is, rude and standoffish, but in fact he is incredibly gracious and really polite, and the gardeners are like, oh, this man is lovely, what are you talking about, Lizzie? So he invites Mr. Gardiner to go fishing, and Mrs. Gardiner and Lizzie go on a walk whilst they're doing that, and during this time, Lizzie gets a letter from Mrs. Bennet, I believe, or probably Mrs. Bennet, who is in, like, the worst tizzy in the world, but this time it's actually for a good reason. Turns out that after, she stopped returning his calls, letters, he's dead to her, Mr. Wickham decided to set his sights on 15-year-old Lydia. He has a type, and that type is no. So, bad Wickham. Bad. Should be in jail, Wickham. So he basically promised Lydia that he was going to marry her, and they have run away to elope, which Lizzie is like, oh my god, one, I now know that this is his MO. We have no money to pay him off with, though. He's going to ruin Lydia's life. They're probably going to go off, have a bunch of fun, and then he's going to leave her, and her, virtue and everything is going to be gone, because that was, the worst thing that could ever happen, is that she is no longer pure. I don't know why I'm being coy. Yeah, and she will never marry, and she'll be left destitute and be besmirched, and it will then affect the entire family's reputation. And worst thing ever, she is like panicked. She's like, I need to go, I need to try and fix this. Darcy hears, he's like, okay, here, have my carriage, go, you need to get this done. Do you need me to help? And she's like, no, I need to talk to my uncle who is in London, I need to get Jane, such and such. However, by the time she gets back home, Wickham and Lydia are married, and she's like, what? Because he'd made it very clear that he was only going to marry her if they paid him like an extortionate amount of money. And she's like, none of us have this. Did my uncle do this? Because we will be indebted to him forever. Mr. Bennet is like, I have no clue. I told no one to give him any money, and because I can't pay them back, my brother says that he didn't pay them, so I don't know what is happening. But Wickham and Lydia arrive so that Lydia can flaunt the fact that she is the first one to be married, because she's still completely oblivious. Like, people hate on Lydia, and I think she's just a naive 15-year-old girl. I think she gets way too much hate for what happened to her. She was a victim, she didn't, realise. Kitty is inconsolable because she's lost her second half, basically. However, I also think it's better for her that Lydia is now out of the picture, because now Kitty can take after one of the other girls and maybe not have this kind of thing happen to her, but by the by. Okay, so we are ignoring the fact that it's 3 hours later now, and the camera died and the sun has gone down, and we're just gonna keep going. So, where was I? Oh yes, so Lydia and Wickham come for a visit so that Lydia can show off her new husband and all that stuff, because she is still completely oblivious and very much thinks that she has won the day, and she can trot it around the rest of her sisters that she was the first to get married, therefore she is the best, and such and such. And during this visit, she lets slip that Darcy was at their wedding and was George Wickham's best man. And so Lizzie was like, well, there's no way that he would be the best man at Wickham's wedding out of the goodness of his heart, because he hates him. So she figured out, she's like, okay, so Darcy was the one that gave him the money to marry Lydia and was there at the wedding to make sure that Wickham married her, so that the Bennet family wasn't in ruin and there was no scandal or anything like that. And so she's like, oh, okay. Like, so already her conflicting feelings about the fact that he was lovely to her the last time they met, and now this, and she's like, oh my god, I was completely wrong. So after that, Lydia and Wickham are going up north to Scotland, I think, because Wickham has run up some bad debts, and now he is on... I think he's also like either defected from the army or he's been causing trouble for the army, so they're basically sending him up north to not have to deal with him anymore. Mr. Bennet has banned Lydia from ever coming back. Mrs. Bennet is distraught about this because that's her daughter. But Mr. Bennet is also like, no, I don't want that man back in my house. It's unclear as to how serious he is about that, really. So time has gone on, and suddenly Lady Catherine de Bourgh appears at their house, absolutely furious, demanding to talk to Lizzie. Lizzie's like, what the hell could I have possibly done wrong? I haven't seen you in like a year or whatever. So she goes and has a walk with her, and Lady Catherine de Bourgh basically says, is it true that you're marrying my nephew? And she's like, no. Where did you hear that? She's like, because I have it on good authority that he proposed to you. And she's like, yeah, but I said no. And she's like, okay, because he's marrying my daughter. It's been planned. You are not getting in the way of this. It's like highly intimated that it's Caroline that tipped Lady Catherine de Bourgh off, because Caroline wants a bit of that Darcy, and Lizzie is her main competition at this point. So, anyway. And Lizzie's like, well, yeah, no, he proposed to me, but I said no. And she's like, okay, well, that's good. So if he ever does it again, you'll say no, right? I am demanding that you say no. I am ordering you to say no. And Lizzie, because, you know, if someone tells her she can't do something, she's going to go, watch me, bitch. And she's also like, wait, does that mean he might still be interested in me? Because she has sort of maybe accepted that her incredibly harsh denial and then subsequent continued, like, hostility towards him would have dissuaded him from ever trying to ask for her hand in marriage again. So she basically is like, no, I'm not going to promise that I'll never say no to him. I doubt he ever would propose to me again, but I'm not saying I won't say no. So, in an act of pure stupidity, I don't know why she thinks this would do anything but backfire, Lady Catherine de Bourgh goes to talk to William Darcy, and because it hasn't worked with Elizabeth, and is like, okay, well, you're never allowed to propose to her again. And he's like, wait, does that mean that she might say yes if I ask? So she's basically just tipped him off to the fact that Lizzie might actually like him back. Short-sightedness there on Lady Catherine de Bourgh's part. I don't know why I forgot that word for a sec, but anyway. And so also in another way to like try and rectify his previous wrongdoings, Darcy convinces the Bingleys to come back to Netherfield, and for Charles Bingley to reunite with Jane. Jane is a bit like, well, you ran off and you hurt me. And Charles Bingley is like, yes, because I was a moron. Please let me make amends. And so they start talking again, and then one day Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy appear at the Bennet household, and Charles Bingley asks Jane Bennet to marry him, and she says yes, and it's all great because these two literally made for each other, and Lizzie is like very happy, a bit sad that her like best friend, her love of her life, her sister is going to be leaving her, but she's also told Jane that her feelings for Darcy may have changed. Jane is like, but you hated him, like, and she's like, yeah, but maybe I was a bit prejudiced towards him. I might have got the wrong end of the stick. Maybe he's just awkward, which he is, poor darling. And Mr. Darcy has, as I said before, heard from Catherine de Bourgh that maybe Lizzie's feelings may have changed. So, after the engagement of Bingley and Jane, they're all going for a walk, and he sort of falls back a little bit with Lizzie and is like, my aunt told me that there is possibly a possibility that your feelings may have grown a little bit warmer towards me, and Lizzie's like, yeah, there might also be a bit of a possibility of that. And he's like, so if I asked you to marry me, because my feelings haven't changed, and in complete opposition to what happened with Mr. Collins, he basically says, like, I asked you once, that was going to be the end of it, because I, appreciate that you know your own mind and everything like that. Whereas Mr. Collins was asked her again and again, because he was like, well, clearly you're just having me on, you're just joking, you don't know what you're saying. Clearly you want to marry me. He says, but I've, got some new evidence that maybe you have changed your mind. I will ask you one more time. If you say no, that'll be the end of it. We will remain friends, but I will never ask you again because I'm not going to hound you like that. So he asks Lizzie to marry him, and she says yes, and so they go and tell Mr. Bennet, and Mr. Bennet is like, every other time I've heard you talk about this man, you've said about how much you didn't like him. Are you sure that you're doing this for the right reasons? You're not just marrying him because you're worried about what will happen to our family should I die? And she's like, no, I am, like, genuinely in love with him. And he's like, well, then absolutely get married. And despite the fact that it is never written in the text, I am fairly certain that Jane and Lizzie and Charles Bingley and William Darcy have a joint wedding and get married, and as far as that goes, live happily ever after. Nothing is known about Mary and Kitty, but I imagine with Lydia out the picture, Kitty probably grew a bit more sensible, may have married well, you don't know. Mary, as I say, if she ended up as a spinster, I doubt she would mind, particularly. They are sort of slightly non-characters in the book, so... But, yes, that is what happened in Pride and Prejudice. I hope that made sense. So, I would absolutely love your thoughts on this, the formatting of this video. Did it work for you with the whiteboard? Was the framing okay? Did you like the way I manically described it? I will give you a little bit of context in that one of my friends has always said she loves the way I tell stories to her from, like, if I've watched a movie or something like that. She's never fully explained whether or not it makes sense when I tell her stories, or if she just finds it funny the way I do it. So that's what this is. I was like, well, maybe other people will enjoy it as well. Yes, that was Pride and Prejudice as told by me. If you like this video, please consider giving it a like and maybe subscribe if you want to see more. Absolutely no pressure if you don't. Be kind to yourself and be kind to others, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.